Welcome everyone to the IUN Community Garden presentation, Indoor Gardening. My name is Leslie Kaiser, Garden Coordinator, and I'll be serving as a moderator tonight. Rebecca Cates is our presenter. Rebecca is the Lake County Urban Agriculture Extension Educator through Purdue Extension. She works out of the Crown Point office. Rebecca graduated from Purdue University with degrees in wildlife and forestry and natural resources. She enjoys growing vegetables and food for pollinators in her own yard. And Rebecca also enjoys helping people grow their own food and enjoy the outdoors. She can be reached at busser@purdue.edu. Rebecca, we're excited to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Leslie and Amanda. Excited to be here talking about indoor growing, which I feel like indoor growing can mean a few different things. But what we're going to be talking about today will be hydroponic, aquaponic systems, microgreens, and growing indoors in containers. Also talking a little bit about houseplants and vegetables. So the container growing part could be used for both. So the idea of growing indoors, at least on a larger scale, like if you're a producer or growing food for yourself or for others, is considered controlled environment agriculture. It's more energy efficient than traditional agriculture, allows people to grow in places with limited farmland or limited land access. It allows us to feed more people, to help with the growing population and less farmland that we have available. Allows us to grow a greater variety of crops locally and extend our growing season. It also allows us to reduce emissions from things like transportation because we're growing more locally or growing for ourselves, and also emissions from production systems. It allows us to boost the economy through supporting more local growers. So whether you live in a rural or an urban area, you can still be producing food. We can control our inputs more efficiently. So we often end up using less resources and less energy. We also can use less pesticides, often because indoor growing systems have less or no pest issues, depending on the system. And then the plants tend to grow quicker because nutrients are actually more accessible than in traditional agricultural systems in a more open environment. A con to control environment agriculture is that it can be more expensive to start up with these startup equipment. So instead of just growing in your own land, you would have to purchase the equipment that we'll talk about. And also if you're using some of the systems like hydroponic or aquaponic systems that include things like pumps and air pumps, if a part is broken, it can halt production entirely. So just an overview of the outlook for controlled environment agriculture. If you are considering going into indoor growing as a business, vertical farming is expected to grow by 24%, and hydroponic farming is expected to grow by 18% by the year 2024. Controlled environment agricultural systems can produce up to 11% more yield with 69% less water than field crops. An efficient aquaponic system could use up to 98% less water than a comparable field operation and can produce up to 30% faster than traditional soil-based plants. So lots of reasons to get into controlled environment agriculture. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about hydroponic systems. Some of you may have heard of hydroponic systems. Essentially what hydroponic means is it's growing plants in water and nutrients and added oxygen. So the word hydroponic means water, and then ponics is labor. So you can have an open or closed system hydroponic system. An open system uses new water and nutrients that are being pumped into the system, and a closed system uses recycled nutrients and water. And I have a couple of pictures from Dr. Christian Amali at Purdue, which you'll be receiving some links to resources from his website after this presentation. So a couple of different system ideas would be flood and drain tables, pictured here on the far left, which is the black tub, the 3-inch depth. So these plants are sitting in trays, well, they're sitting in baskets in trays that are then over water, tubs of water or reservoirs. And then the nutrient film technique has continuous nutrients that are pumping through this kind of piping system. You can use PVC pipe, or you could use trays that are specially designed for this nutrient film technique. And there's not so much water into this system, but it's just continuous nutrient flow through this system that can be recycled or new. And then a deep water culture system is similar to a flood and drain table, except you're using a 12-inch depth or a greater depth than the flood and drain tables. And so you're less likely to need a separate reservoir for your water and nutrients. You could just have it all in one system. And these are larger scale systems, but you could see how, for example, the flood and drain tables on the far left, a homeowner could easily have one of these systems. Some typical materials that you would need for a hydroponic system would be things like lighting, your flood table, which is where your plants are going to be resting in a flood and drain system. So you can see this picture on the right is an established system in an indoor Purdue Research Center, indoor growing Purdue Research Center. And so they have the plants sitting in trays in a flood table, and then the reservoir, which is the white bin at the bottom, holds all of the water and nutrients that are cycling through the flood tables to the different plants. And then also oxygen is being pumped into those systems as well. So the water, the nutrients, and the oxygen are all being cycled through this system from the reservoir using tubing, submersible pumps, and different fittings. You're also going to need to maintain your water quality. So you're going to need to maintain a pH of 5 to 6.5 ideally. So you might have to use different water treatments. For example, if any of you have had fish in the past, for example, whether it was goldfish or a more complicated saltwater system, you know that you have to check the water to maintain that steady and ideal pH. And also you're going to need a nutrient solution specific to hydroponic systems. So you wouldn't use the same fertilizer that you would use in a ground garden. You would use specific nutrients designed for hydroponic systems. And you can find these at local garden centers, larger big box stores, and online companies that specialize in hydroponic systems. You can also buy a pH meter to read the pH, or you can get those little test strips that you would find at the aquarium store. You're also going to need some sort of substrate, because in hydroponic systems, we're not using soil, because if the soil was just sitting in water all day, it could just wash away, or it could lead to fungal growth and disease. So you're using a soilless mix. So you can use different substrates like rock wool cubes, which are pictured here. And I'll show some other examples of different soilless substrates, but rock wool tends to be pretty popular. You can start your seedlings yourself. So you can buy different seed starting rock wool trays where you can start seeds, but then eventually you're going to want to divide these seeds into groupings that are 6 inches apart in your system. And then you're going to have those plants in the substrate in a basket that you can purchase specifically for hydroponic systems. And then that basket goes into the grow tray that is then either directly over a reservoir or in a flood tray that is then connected to a reservoir. You'll also potentially need a humidifier or some sort of greenhouse system to maintain a higher humidity, 45 to 55% humidity, which is typically higher than most home systems. So a hydroponic system you can think of as being similar to a greenhouse system. So here's a better look at some of those hydroponic designs using these graphics from Dr. Christian Amali. A flood table design has that flood tray. The plants are sitting in baskets in this tray that has water that's being pumped up from the reservoir, which is under the table in this picture. And the nutrient film technique, the nutrients are being constantly going through those flood trays from the reservoir, but you don't need as much water. It's mostly just the nutrients that are being pumped through the system. And then I do have a picture here of an aeroponic tower, which is actually a type of hydroponic system, but it's a vertical hydroponic system. So you can get these aeroponic towers where water is being pumped up through a tube in the center of usually a cylindrical tower and then misting the plant roots. So great if you have limited space. Here's a closer look at that flood table design. This tends to be a popular way of getting into hydroponics. You can actually use very limited to no electricity with this system. You can find air pumps that require no electricity, or air stones that require no electricity, often at like different fish centers, places that would sell aquarium supplies. And you can use a reservoir. It could be a tub that you find, or a repurposed container, or a container specifically designed for a hydroponic system. And this hightechgardening.com has different resources that they recommend as well. So that's where I got this figure. And then you would have some sort of floating platform for the plant baskets to sit in. And you could make holes in the container if it doesn't come already with the holes in the container for the basket. And this could be a lid to a Tupperware container, a really large Tupperware container. It could be, I've seen people use floating styrofoam, just pieces of styrofoam. So it's a really great way to utilize different materials that maybe you would normally have around the house, especially if you already have water systems like fish aquariums. And so this is a deep water culture, which is a type of flood table design. So it's just deeper than the 3 inches. You would typically need this to be anywhere from 8 to 12 inches just to have the right amount of water and nutrients that you need. And some typical maintenance that you would have for these kinds of systems would be changing out the nutrient solution every 2 to 3 weeks and replenishing the water as needed. So if your water table goes down lower, so it's not touching the roots anymore, you would just add water. You wouldn't add more nutrients because the nutrients are still there. They're just in a more concentrated form. So you're just adding more water. But then you would completely empty the whole reservoir and add your nutrients and your water together every 2 to 3 weeks. And then you would want to just maintain that ideal temperature of 65 to 75 degrees. A nutrient film technique system is pretty popular as well. It's a great way to use not a lot of space, and it's a great teaching tool. I've seen this system in some schools, even around here in Lake County, Indiana. So the plants can be suspended in trays or in PVC piping 6 inches apart in their baskets, and then nutrient film is just being pumped through the system from this reservoir, which is at the bottom right, and it's just pumped into the top part of the system, the top left part of the system. And the way that the pipes are angled in this kind of almost bookshelf design is that they're angled so that that nutrient film is going to just, gravity is going to help it go through the whole system. So I have a few tables here, which are from Brianna Nelson and her team, Dr. Wong, Dr. Langenhoven from Purdue, and they're actually developing youth education around hydroponic systems, which is exciting. And these tables I was approved to use for this presentation. So these are some different crops that can be grown using hydroponic systems. So you wouldn't necessarily grow things like potatoes, but you could grow carrots or radishes and a lot of greens and herbs, even strawberry. And it also lets you, this kind of table, which will be eventually available on their website, but is currently in work. It has information on the different temperature and pH requirements and spacing requirements for the different crops. And this kind of information we'll revisit when we talk about aquaponic systems. And this is just continuing the table, talking about different leafy vegetables, and their amount of space that they require in the system and ideal temperature and pH. I mentioned I would talk about different substrates besides rock wool. So rock wool is very popular, but you can also purchase other kinds of substrates, such as perlite, peat moss, coconut coir, or hemp. I will say if you're planning to do an aquaponic system, which is essentially a hydroponic system, but with fish, you wouldn't use coconut coir because it can actually change different things about the water quality that is not helpful to the fish system in the system. But this table will let people compare different substrates for cost and availability and ease of use, among other things. So typically what I see a lot of times is people use rock wool, or they'll use peat moss, or they'll use the gravel or some kind of porous rock I'll see sometimes. But there's also things like glass wool, volcanic tuff, burlap, and humus. And you can find all these different kinds of substrates online or at certain garden centers that work with hydroponic systems. And I did check, and I know that a couple of the local big box stores do carry hydroponic systems and also the different supplies for those systems. So Home Depot and Lowe's, they carry them. Also vermiculite and wood fiber are different kinds of soil as substrate that you can use in hydroponic systems. I'll also talk about lighting. So when you're purchasing lighting for a hydroponic or aquaponic system or any sort of indoor growing system where you're not just relying on your window for lighting, you might start finding different words like full spectrum or red blue or T8. And so these pictures, this is a graph from Dr. Christian Amali, shows how those different light systems affect different kinds of lettuce. And it seems that red blue lighting tends to do better with lettuce at least. And I know you can find all these different kinds of lightings at different garden centers and big box stores too. When we compare different hydroponic techniques as far as yield and water use, we do see higher yield in flood table and nutrient film techniques and less water use in nutrient film techniques. So it seems that the nutrient film technique has the others beat as far as water use. Now I'll transition to talking about aquaponic systems. So aquaponic systems are very similar to hydroponic systems, but we introduce fish and microbes. And so you can either be introducing different microbes into the system or the microbes that are naturally present in like the fish system. And so you would have those microbes that then convert the fish waste into usable nutrients for the plant. So you actually don't have to introduce nutrients into this system. So I mentioned avoiding coconut coir as a substrate for fish. Some positives for aquaponic systems is that it's the same positives as a hydroponic system, but you could also additionally be harvesting the fish. This is a table that shows different kinds of fish that can be used in aquaponic systems. Obviously, you're not going to be harvesting goldfish or koi, but you might, if you have a larger system, have tilapia or catfish or trout are all very common in large systems where you would then be able to harvest not just the plants, but also the fish. Some cons for the aquaponic system is that you have more time commitment for these systems and you have to be more consistent than with a hydroponic system as far as maintenance, because not only are the plants depending on your consistency of that water quality, that pH, but the fish are as well. And of course, if you miss feeding the fish, you're not going to have your aquaponic system. You might have to start over. Yeah, but you don't need added nutrients because the fish are essentially providing your nutrients. You would also have a higher startup cost for the aquaponics system. Oh, I guess I should also mention this table shows optimal temperature, mature size, days to reach maturity, things like that, and like what the different fish eat. And so these are some things to consider when you're considering what fish to put into your system. So if you don't want to deal with a carnivorous fish, which would typically be more expensive to feed, you might go for an omnivorous fish. So the feeding of an omnivorous fish, similar to a goldfish, is going to be less expensive than a carnivorous fish, and typically their food is going to be more available. And you also want to consider their mature size when you're thinking about the size of your system and the temperature as well. And we'll talk about comparing the fish needs with the plant needs, because there is definitely a sweet spot, but you want to be able to meet the needs of the fish as well as the plants in an aquaponic system. The plants that do well in aquaponic systems are pretty similar to the plants that do well in hydroponic systems. This table is listed by type of vegetable, so leafy, fruiting, root vegetables, and also flowers. So you could also be doing flowers as well. It doesn't have to just be vegetables. And then also it's sorted by the season that they are grown in. So the blue words seem to be cool season and the red words seem to be warm season crops. But if you're growing indoors, maybe this doesn't matter so much. I guess I should mention that aquaponic and hydroponic systems can be outdoors, but you would have that added element of controlling the temperature outdoors. So here's that table I was talking about. When you're comparing the water quality needs, so the pH, the temperature, the nutrient needs for different plants and different fish, and also those microbes that are going to be turning the fish waste into nutrients for the plants, there's a sweet spot. And so this bottom row that shows the aquaponic ideal water quality parameters shows your ideal temperature, pH, and different nutrients. But the nutrients would be coming from the microbes in the fish. You could just test these using different water testing equipment. And if you don't have your own water testing equipment, although it is recommended to test aquaponic systems a couple times a week because you have that added needs of the fish, you can go to pet stores, and a lot of times they will have, they will test your water for you. So if you are interested in getting into aquaponics, what you'll need is pretty similar to the hydroponic system. You'll need the bin for the fish, which is similar to the reservoir. That's where your water and nutrients is coming from. It needs to be at least a foot deep, depending on the different fish that you'll have in your system, but at least a foot deep. And then you're going to have your grow bed where the plants are, which is similar to your grow tray in the hydroponic system. You'll also see in this system, we have like the air stones at the bottom of this. So the oxygen is being pumped into that system in the fish tank and also in the grow bed. And you're going to have a sediment tank, which is where any solids from the fish waste is going to be filtered out and sink to the bottom. You're going to have that water pump that's then pumping the filtered water into the biofilter, which is where the microbes live. And if you get a system that already has all of this together, oftentimes the biofilter, you won't see all of these pieces separate. A lot of times the biofilter will be integrated into the fish tank, or it'll be integrated into the grow bed, because you can actually find these systems that are already ready to go, and in a small system as well. Like I actually saw that some pet stores are starting to sell aquaponic systems. So very small systems, and it just looks like a standard fish tank. Some other things that you might consider would be your pH testing supplies, of course, and your water quality testing supplies. Water primer, because just like if you start up a fish tank, you're going to want to make sure that that water is primed and doesn't have anything in it that the fish doesn't need. So you can get water primer at your pet store or aquarium center. You're going to need fish food and also fish illness remedies potentially. So if you've had fish in the past, you know, sometimes you need like a quarantine tank. So you might have a quarantine tank for sick fish to prevent it from infecting other fish. And you might have some common fish illness remedies, medicines from the pet store on hand as well. To set up your system, first you're going to build your support system for all your materials. And this goes for hydroponics as well. So if you're using some sort of shelving unit, have that all set up first. Make sure everything's near an outlet and a light source. So, you know, an outlet for your light source, or if your light source is a lamp that you've installed red, blue LED lights into, just making sure that's close by. I've seen that as well. And finish putting your system together before adding water. So then you can test that all the pumps and sumps and filters are working. And you're going to let the water sit and add those priming treatments as needed. You're going to run the water for a few days with no plants or fish in it. And then you're going to slowly introduce the fish, just like you would setting up an aquarium. Then you're going to let that cycle for a few days and then introduce plants. And while all this is happening, you could be starting your seeds in that soilless substrate before putting them into the larger rock wool blocks or whatever soilless system you're using. And then you're going to introduce the plants. And I will mention too that I have seen people start plants in soil or potting soil before transitioning them into a soilless system like hydroponics. You would just want to remove as much of that potting soil from the plant roots as you can before putting it in the system, so you're not introducing new nutrients or potential for disease or infection. General maintenance of an aquaponics system, you're checking the water quality twice a week, monitoring your plants and fish every day, and feeding the fish every day, of course. I do have linked here, and you'll all get a link to this, a home aquaponics system video series that a colleague of mine put together from Purdue. And for her system, it looks like she used a system that you can buy off of chewy.com. So that's a pet store. I was actually able to find it online. And so everything you need is set there, but she has a video series on how to put it together and explaining what the different parts look like. And you can definitely build this kind of system using parts that you find at different garden stores and big box stores as well, and also pet stores. So you would have your basket for the plants, and she uses porous rocks as her substrate. So you're putting I should mention that the purpose of the substrate is to have structure for the plant's roots. So the plant's not getting nutrients from the substrate, they're getting nutrients from that, either from the fish waste or from your added nutrients in a hydroponic system. But the substrate is really just there for structure for the plant roots. And in an aquaponic system, it also creates a space for microbes to live. So if you're not introducing microbes through like a microbe filter or biofilter, it would be a place for your microbes to live. And then in her system, she also uses pebbles at the surface of the basket, which is a tip and trick for reducing algae. At this time, are there any questions about hydroponic and aquaponics?
We have a comment. I grow my plants inside and use shop lights. I am successful, but I suppose there are better lights out there.
There are lots of different options out there for lights. And I would say if you're having luck with those, continue to use those. Especially if someone's going into production, they might do a little more, they might get a little more specific into the kinds of grow lights that you're using. But I would say your shop lights are likely full spectrum. And so that's definitely an option. And yeah, if it works for you, keep going.
What can I do to prevent flying insects from infesting the vegetable plants that I start indoors in the spring?
It's possible that they're coming in with the soil, and that's nothing wrong with like the soil company or anything. That just happens sometimes. I have seen, and it's in one of the resources that you'll get sent out about indoor growing, I've seen some recommendations to bake the soil. So you can definitely bake your potting soil mix before using it to reduce chances of that happening.
When you say bake, do you mean put it in the oven?
Yes. Yeah, it's very surprising, but it's in a publication. So that's definitely an option to keep that from happening.
Another comment, I have found that those insects also come inside on vegetables/produce.
That is a great point. Yeah, bringing it in on produce. If you're like in the growing season, you're bringing produce in. And also that reminds me of something too. If you have house plants or any plants that you're taking outside and then bringing inside, it's a good thing to check them really well for pests and possibly even keep them in kind of a quarantine space for a few days just to make sure that they don't have any pests before bringing them into areas with other plants. We're going to talk about microgreens and then some indoor container growing information too. So microgreens is one kind of indoor growing. It's essentially growing different kinds of vegetable plants, but harvesting and consuming them at an early age. So before they even really get their set of true leaves, you're really eating them when they're only a couple weeks old. It's a highly sustainable system. You use less water, usually less electricity. And this particular company that is Super Microgreens that I actually got some great information from, and they actually have starter kits for microgreens if you're interested in that. They use a soilless medium, which you see at this top picture here. It's made of recyclable materials such as burlap. and then it waters from below. So it's kind of similar to the hydroponic system, but there's no sumps or pumps or anything. So you're essentially planting the seeds of the microgreens, which are really just any kind of, you can use different greens and herbs, and radishes tend to be pretty popular. So you don't have to buy seeds specifically for microgreens. You can grow really anything you would grow in the garden. Different kinds of brassicas like broccoli and cauliflower do well too. And you would plant those very densely in this soilless either fabric, or you could use potting soil. And for their system, they have it sitting in a tray of water similar to a hydroponic system. So it's floating in a grow tray, or you would just water it from the bottom. And so this shows an example of the potting soil mix option. And so this is also a Purdue Extension YouTube series that you'll receive a link for. And so in the series, she uses a recycled leftover container, a carryout container, and she puts drainage holes in the bottom of the container and just puts potting mix in the container, and then spreads different seeds densely on top of the potting soil. She does get the potting soil wet before adding the seeds, so that's important to mention. And then you're putting the seeds at a density of about 6 seeds to a square inch. You don't have to get very exact here, but that's just an estimate, and you'll see in the video what her seed distribution looks like. And then you'll cover it lightly with potting soil, cover the container. So she uses the lid for her container, or you could use a plastic bag or put it in a greenhouse system if you have an indoor greenhouse system for about 3 days or until germination. So once the seeds start germinating, which sometimes they can look kind of fuzzy, almost as if they have a fungal problem, but it's likely just the germination of the seeds. And then once they start to germinate, you're going to remove the lid or remove them from that highly humid environment. And then you would water them from the bottom. So anytime that the soil feels dry, you're going to water from the bottom to reduce disease and infection. And then you can harvest them once they're a couple weeks old or a couple inches high. Talking about container growing, you might be starting seeds indoors for outdoor transplant, or you can definitely continue to grow indoors, whether it be vegetable, herb, or totally inedible plant. If you are growing for long term, you're going to need a larger container, and definitely you're going to need drainage holes. So some container growing considerations: you're going to need to water container plants more often than plants in the ground. But if they're indoors, you're not going to water very often in the winter because they're not going to be photosynthesizing as much. They're not going to be growing as much. You're also not going to need to fertilize them over winter. And for watering, you're going to want to avoid using water systems that have salt introduced, such as if you're on well water and you have a water softener. And you still need to make sure that your plants are getting at least 6 hours of sunlight, whether that be from a window or an artificial light source. Only use chemicals like pesticides and fertilizers labeled for container use because they have specific needs. So follow the label for that. And if you're using a hydroponic system, only using your chemicals that are labeled for hydroponic systems. And you're still going to want to monitor for pest, diseases, and weeds because those definitely, as we've been talking about tonight, still affect indoor plants. And then for long-term growth, you're going to want to replant plants in larger containers as needed. So once the plant starts to become root bound, if it's a smaller plant, you can pull it out of the pot and see if those roots are all matted on the bottom and become dense. Or if it's a larger plant, you can pull it up out of the container or even try to kind of poke in there with one of those kind of aerating tools to see how densely the roots are packed, because once the roots are matted, they're really running out of room. And so when it's more roots than soil, you definitely need to move into a larger container. And this happens sometimes when you're preparing plants for outdoor transplant as well. Like I know before my tomato plants last year were ready to go outside, I had to transfer them into a larger container. And it can be, especially when it's something temporary like that, you can use pots and things that are meant for plant growth, or you can use just some sort of like BPA-free, food-safe container. Like I used red Solo cups, and that was totally fine. For your soil mix, you can definitely use potting mix that is store-bought, or you can use homemade mix, which this is a container and raised bed gardening publication from Purdue that has a recipe for making your own potting mix, which a lot of garden centers use these kinds of mixes, and a lot of farmers use these kinds of mixes for growing large quantities. Or if you're using raised bed systems as well, might be an option to consider. If you are buying large quantities of potting mix from the store, you might be starting to purchase in cubic feet. So typically they come in quarts, but 30 quarts is equivalent to 1 cubic foot. Some general maintenance for growing in containers is if you have a vegetable or herb indoors long-term, you're going to pinch off the flowers to prevent seeding and then the end of life cycle, unless it's a fruiting vegetable. So if it was like a squash or a tomato, you're not going to pinch off those flowers. But if you are working with basil or some sort of green that's not supposed to be a fruiting plant, you're going to pinch off those flowers to keep it from going to seed, bolting, and ending its life cycle. And there's a video out there for that as well from a Purdue educator. If you are growing plants indoors long-term, whether in a window or an artificial light source, you're going to turn the plants routinely to receive enough light so that all the plants are getting enough light, and making sure that you have an even source of lighting. You're going to maintain a steady temperature of 65 to 75 degrees ideally, but not more than 75 degrees unless you know the plant that you're working with is designed for a warmer environment. But warmer environments for plants that aren't supposed to do well in those types of temperatures can actually prevent flowering in plants that you do want to flower. And you're going to want to keep plants away from warm and cold drafts. So like your air conditioning, your air vents, your radiators, keeping them away from those. You're going to want to, again, maintain a higher humidity than a typical home has. So maybe you have a home humidifier, or you can keep your plants in a terrarium like you would have for like a reptile or aquarium. Or some people will use a rock tray with water to naturally have more humidity. You're going to want to fertilize your container plants as instructed on the label, using fertilizers that are only intended for container plants and also not during the winter when they're not growing as much. You're going to want to clean your tools between uses, especially between different plants, so that you're not running the chance of infecting plants. So you can use a 1:10 ratio of bleach to water to do that. Especially when you think there might be a disease infection. And then of course, repotting when the roots become matted. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. So some other maintenance that you might consider for long-term indoor plants, so this is not your vegetable plants, this is more for your house plants, is you can gently spray or wipe the leaves occasionally to get them that fresh look, to also to remove any dust. And also it can actually facilitate opening of the stomata on the plant leaves, which can lead to increased gas exchange and actually help the plant. So you're not going to do this very often, but every once in a while. And there are leaf oils available that you can apply to non-hairy leaf plants if on the label of that leaf oil it says it's intended for that kind of plant. And then if you do have a hairy leaf plant, you can brush the plant leaves to kind of give it the same effect of opening the stomata and making them look more fresh. For indoor plants, you can take them outdoors in the summer if they prefer direct light, or if they prefer low light or indirect light, you can have them on a porch or some area with an overhang. And of course, inspecting for pests before bringing them back inside, sometimes considering a quarantine away from the rest of your plants. So sometimes people will bring their indoor plants outdoors in the summer and then bring them back inside in the fall. And so I have a table here, which you'll all receive a link to on indoor horticulture. And so this has some popular indirect or low light house plants. I also want to talk about some common issues that houseplants and indoor plants run into. If you see yellowing leaves and a spindly plant, so it's kind of looking like a gangly teenager, it's not really lush with lush foliage, you might need more light. So bringing it into a window or an area that has more light, or considering an artificial light source. And again, you don't have to get anything fancy as far as purchasing grow lights. You might just add a grow light bulb to a lamp that you have already, but just making sure that that plant's getting enough light. If it has yellow and dropping leaves, you might have improper watering or drainage. So you can overwater or underwater the plant and have the same effects. So when you do water your plant, you're going to want to water it until the water drains out the bottom, but not let it sit in the water that's drained out for very long. So if it is just sitting in that tray, just dumping it before you're done with that plant. And the soil, the potting soil for the plant should remain moist a 1/4 inch down. So you can test if a plant needs water by just putting a finger in. And if it is dry if it's dry below a 1/4 inch down, you might need to water. Or if you're watering from the bottom, which definitely is also an option, you would water it until the top is moist, but not let it stand in the water long term. If you notice that water is standing on the surface of your soil for more than a few seconds, you might have poor drainage in your potting soil. And so you would add perlite or sand for increased drainage. You would just mix that into the soil that you have. If you notice a buildup of white or brown crust on the surface of the potting soil or around the rim of the pot, you might have salt accumulation. And in that case, you're going to want to consider using a different water source that has less salt. And you can pour that new water source into the plant from the top to have that salt go through the potting soil. Also, watering from the top can reduce that salt accumulation. So if you are watering from the bottom regularly, considering watering from the top every once in a while to prevent that. If you notice yellow mottling under the leaves or holes in the leaves, you might have pest damage. Some common insect pests indoors might be spider mites or whiteflies. Spider mites leave webbing behind, such as the name spider mites, and whiteflies don't. So those are just 2 common insect pests for indoor plants. You can control both with insecticidal soap or by washing the leaves with soapy water, which I think one of our master gardeners mentioned too. I would like to thank the Controlled Environment Agricultural Team at Purdue, and I have all of their contact information here as well and their pictures. So we have Dr. Christian Amali, Dr. Haiji Kim, and Dr. Petrus Langenhoven. So if ever you have an indoor growing question, you can definitely reach out to myself. But if I don't know the answer, chances are I'm reaching out to one of these people. I also invite you to consider following your local county extension office on social media and at their website. It's Lake County. If you're in Lake County, we have a Facebook and a website. And then also I'd like to share my email here. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Do you find that plants that are grown through hydroponics are going to experience less disease and pests than those grown in soil?
They do, yes. So you're definitely less likely to have pest issues. And as long as you're keeping up with your proper water treatment, like having regular water changes, keeping your nutrients and your pH in check, you are less likely to have disease issues as well. Because a lot of times the diseases come from the soil or from pests. So using soilless substrates and having them indoors, generally, you're going to have less disease issues too. Great question. If you are having disease issues and you're growing outdoors, I highly recommend purchasing seed varieties that have disease resistance, because that's a great way to start. And also watering from the base of the plant and mulching with something, whether it be grass clippings, straw, landscape fabric, something that's going to reduce that backsplash. from the soil.
Rebecca, can you talk about the photos that are on the slide?
Yeah, the one on the left is an aquaponics system that one of the schools is going to be getting. So that's really exciting. And it looks like they have koi in that particular system. So not for consumption, but, and then this picture on the right was a hydroponic engineering design kind of workshop for kids that one of my graduate student colleagues, when I was a grad student, he came and was working with pre-K, K-year-old students, and they were effectively using these totes full of water. And then they had these styrofoam rafts that they actually worked with their parents to drill holes into. And he had the baskets and the substrate and the plants, and they built their own systems. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I would just say that they need some sort of air stone or air pump in there to keep that long term. Thanks for the opportunity to give this presentation.